He helped them out of poverty, and all that time they never knew he once slept in their basement. Now it's your turn. The box was tucked away in the storage room, under old winter coats, nearly forgotten. Sarah had been looking for something else entirely, a pair of mittens for the youngest, which she thought might still fit. She hadn't meant to open the box. She merely brushed against it with her shoulder, and the lid shifted. Inside was a thin folder wrapped in a scarf. Sarah knew instantly what it was: the letters. She sat down right there on the floor, as if opening something she'd been trying not to think about. The first letter had arrived in January, 15 years ago. Back then, they had just moved into this house. No furniture, a broken boiler, and 3 children without even warm socks. She remembered opening that first envelope, plain, with no return address. Inside was a $200 bill and a sheet of paper folded into quarters. On it, one sentence written in black ink, slightly uneven handwriting: "For warmth and food, don't ask." Sarah cried the whole evening, not because she was afraid, but because suddenly it felt just a little less heavy. The letters kept coming, every 6 months or so, sometimes more often. Each envelope held money, sometimes more, sometimes less, but always just when they didn't know where else to turn. They tried to find out who it was, asked the neighbors, checked the post office cameras, even called the bank when they once spotted a transfer. But every lead dissolved. The sender's name changed each time. Sometimes there was none at all. Sarah ran her fingers once more over the old pages. The handwriting varied, but the tone was always the same: calm, warm. She looked up at the light coming through the tiny storage window, and for the first time in years, she thought, maybe it was time to untie this knot. Quietly, carefully, with respect for the one who had stayed in the shadows so long. It was the hardest winter of their lives. The heat worked sporadically. Frost formed on the inside of the kids' bedroom windows, and every morning they had to squeeze the toothpaste out with a spoon because it had frozen overnight. In the kitchen, an old space heater hummed more at the air than at the people, and buckwheat, gray, monotonous, but warm, became their daily ritual of survival. Sarah cooked it in a large pot and served it into bowls as if it were more than just food. Sometimes she added salt if she could find any in the drawer. Sometimes a deceptive pinch of seasoning so the kids would think the taste was changing. But the taste didn't change. Thomas, her husband, spent his days looking for work. After being laid off from the meat plant, he had believed things would get better. He was, as he liked to say, a man with hands. But the job market was empty, and the debt grew. That evening, he came home earlier than usual, silent, with red hands and a stooped back. Without taking off his coat, he sat at the table, picked up a spoon, and ate everything without saying a word. When he went out to the shed to check the meter, Sarah noticed a white envelope wedged under the door by something heavy. It didn't look like a flyer. No name, no return address. She opened it in the kitchen, her hands still sticky with buckwheat. Inside, $340. And again, a brief note in a different handwriting: "For gas and electricity, let it be warm." She dropped the note, stood in the silence, then carefully folded the money, called Thomas, and showed him the envelope. He stared at it for a long time, frowning, suspicious. Then asked sharply, "Is this someone you know?" Sarah shook her head. "I don't know, but it's not the first time." Thomas pressed his lips together. "We don't owe anyone. I'll find a job anyway." But the next morning, the house was warm, for the first time in many weeks. 2 years had passed. The house no longer felt foreign. The walls had been painted, the windows insulated, and in the old shed, Thomas had built a small woodworking space. Sarah took in sewing jobs, children's pajamas, pillowcases, sometimes cafe curtains. The work was sporadic, but it was something. The letters kept coming, at different times of year on random days with no clear pattern, yet always perfectly timed. Once, on the very day the washing machine broke down. Another when their youngest, Lily, needed glasses and insurance wouldn't cover pediatric lenses. They never found out who was sending the money. Thomas grew more dismissive over time. Probably some church fund or someone messing around. But Sarah didn't believe in coincidence. Each letter was too precise, as if the sender somehow already knew their needs. Meanwhile, their eldest son Jake was preparing for college. Thomas insisted they would manage on their own, without handouts. He said handouts with a bitterness that seemed to burn his tongue. He wouldn't allow the children to talk about the letters. "That's not your concern," he said once when Jake tried to bring up the envelopes. "We'll build our lives ourselves. No one owes us anything." That day, Sarah quietly folded the latest letter into the folder. The handwriting was new, more careful, almost calligraphic. Inside, exactly the amount needed for Jake's college deposit. In just 2 words, "Let him learn." Sarah stared at the paper for a long time, then gently tucked it between recipes in a dusty cookbook no one ever used. That evening, Thomas hosted a dinner in Jake's honor. He was in good spirits, even opened a jar of pickled peppers, a rare treat at their table. He raised a toast. "We made it, on our own, and we'll keep making it." Sarah silently lifted her glass, and for the first time she wondered, what if strength wasn't always about standing alone, but knowing when to receive? Jake came home from college during winter break, carrying a checkered notebook and a quiet intensity in his voice. He had grown, more reserved now, spoke less, noticed more. He was the first to ask the kind of questions the family usually avoided. "Mom, do you keep all the letters?" he asked one evening while they were washing dishes together. Sarah nodded. "In the storage room." "Why?" "I want to try something, to see if there's any pattern." He brought the box out to the kitchen table, laying the letters out year by year. He compared dates, paper, even scent. Still, almost nothing. Different handwriting, different styles. Even the envelope types didn't match. But in the 2 most recent letters, he noticed something strange. Both money transfers came from the same bank account. The sender's name on the receipt was L. Kagan. It seemed like a coincidence, but it stuck in his mind. He started digging, first online, then in an old phone book, staff directories, even found some outdated payroll records. The name wasn't that rare. He found 3 people in the county. One was a doctor, another an elderly carpenter. Neither fit. He kept going, for weeks, jotting down addresses, checking routes, looking for links, until he came across a warehouse just outside of town. At the security post sat an old guard with a thermos and a newspaper. "Lev Kagan," the man repeated. "Yeah, I think so. Worked here ages ago. Quiet guy, kept to himself, then just disappeared." "Do you know why?" The guard shrugged. "Not exactly. Some argument with management, I think, or he was let go. Don't know the details. Wasn't my business. People are different. Some swallow it, some walk away." Jake asked for old records, and the guard reluctantly handed him one. It had an address, faded but legible. It was in a neighborhood where houses leaned close together and windows were covered with blankets instead of curtains. He felt he was getting closer to the truth, but wasn't sure he was ready. Because sometimes truth isn't just knowledge, it's a mirror. Jake stood in front of a door, with peeling paint and a dull brass plaque. "Apt. On E-key." The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and old cloth. He knocked twice. The door was opened by a thin man in his 60s. Worn-out sweater, eyes the color of coal. Calm, almost faded. He didn't look surprised, just tilted his head slightly. "Lev Kagan." "Yes, my name is Jake Murphy. He hesitated, unsure where to begin. "You sent the letters to my family." Lev didn't answer. He simply stepped aside to let him in. The room was small and tidy, yellowed wallpaper, an old sofa, and a few succulents on the windowsill. "Did you know my father?" Jake asked as they sat down. "I did," Lev replied quietly. "He was my manager at the warehouse." He paused, then as if recalling someone else's life added, "He fired me during a meeting, in front of everyone." I tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. People laughed. It was unpleasant. Jake clenched his hands. "And after that, All this time, you still helped us? Why? Lev looked at him. A few years later, I happened to learn he had a family, that you were living in that house without heating. I knew what it felt like, to fear the gas bill, and I thought maybe I could do something. Anything. He paused and, as if answering an unspoken question, said, after I was let go, I found a job at a logistics company. It wasn't much, but it was stable. Then I inherited a small sum from an old aunt. Not a fortune, but enough. I decided it was better this way than just spending it on myself. Jake stayed silent. Lev continued, I didn't want it all to end like that. I wanted to leave something behind. Not resentment, a gesture. So no one else would feel the way I felt back then. That evening, as he was leaving, Jake turned back at the door. Thank you, Mr. Kagan. Lev didn't smile, but there was a softness in his eyes. I just did what I once wished someone would have done for me. Thomas found out the truth 2 days later. Jake returned home with a tight expression, placed a note with an address on the table, and said, I found him. He lives alone. He didn't want you to know. Thomas stared at the paper for a long while, at first silently. Then he tore it into 3 pieces. It's none of your business, he said quietly. I thought maybe you'd want to. I don't want to be humiliated again. But that evening, he still put on his old coat, didn't say a word to anyone, and left. The building was exactly as he remembered. The door opened at once. Lev wasn't surprised. They stood in silence. 1 second, 10. A pause so long it couldn't be measured in time. Do you remember me? Thomas asked at last. Of course. They sat down, on the same couch where Jake had sat 2 days before. I was different back then, Thomas said. Thought that being above meant being better. Thought if someone made a mistake, they should be crushed for it. Lev said nothing, just looked at him. I didn't even remember your name. And you, all this time, I didn't want to be like that, that's all. Lev answered softly. He exhaled. Sometimes it's easier to help than to hate. Thomas lowered his head. I didn't deserve it. Not the help, not the forgiveness. Lev shrugged. Maybe not, but I wasn't keeping score. I just thought it was right to do something. They fell silent again. The dim light from a street lamp filtered through the dusty window pane in fractured shafts. Why did you even start? Thomas asked. Because I knew what it was like to ask. And you didn't know what it was like to be heard. I thought maybe one of us needed to learn. Thomas didn't apologize, Lev didn't forgive. But something shifted just slightly in that silence. And it was enough. That year, spring came early. The yard in front of the house was already breathing with damp soil, and the mornings smelled of wet bark and something childlike, as if time itself had chosen to soften. Sarah was sorting the mail, as always. Bills, ads, a yellowed postcard from an aunt in Ohio, and one envelope. Thick, no stamp, her maiden name written neatly on the front. She recognized the handwriting immediately, the same as in the earliest letters. Her hands trembled. She sat down on the porch and slowly tore open the edge. Inside, a blank sheet of paper. No words, no money. Just a small note, carefully tucked between the folds. Now it's your turn. She held the note between her fingers for a long time, as if she could still feel the warmth left by the hand that had written it. That evening, she showed the envelope to Thomas. He didn't say a word, just took the paper, read it, placed it back, and sat beside her. They sat in silence on the porch, watching the neighbor's little girl feed pigeons, scattering crumbs right from her palm. We can do this, Sarah whispered. Yes, he nodded. We can. They started small. A new pair of shoes for a boy from Lily's school, a gift certificate for the woman at the laundromat, an anonymous donation to Jake's college scholarship fund. No one knew where it came from. No one was supposed to. At Christmas, they sent out an envelope, plain white, with a child's drawing inside and $50, to a home where the kitchen had recently burned. No signature, just a handwritten note. Let it be warm. And one morning, Sarah saw Thomas stop outside the supermarket, hand a cashier a bag of groceries, and walk away without waiting for thanks. She didn't say a word, because now they both knew. Some acts don't need a name. They just need to continue.